we're going to get into the background of the band. And there's a lot because there's a lot of guys in this band. So before we
too
do that,
many, too many. Some might say.
Is it
one would
9?
argue,
Is it 9 of them?
yes, and perfect segue into our by the numbers segment. And the first number is 9 because there are 9 members in this band, and I don't know what like 5 of them are doing.
That's at least
Percussion.
3 too many. Yeah,
It's
there's
at
two.
least
There's
3 too
two
many.
additional
Yeah.
percussionists in the band,
Yes.
right?
DJ.
Yeah, a DJ and a sampler, which is ridiculous.
How is
What
that a different job?
Yes. All right. The next number that we are going to do is 40,000, as in $40,000, the amount that Slipknot reportedly spent on their first self-funded album, Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat.
Why?
Wait, how?
Okay. Here's the thing.
I've been to Iowa.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. But like, I have released 6 full-length albums, 1 EP, and recorded 2 more full-length albums worth of material and 2 more EPs worth of material that haven't been released. And I have not spent anywhere close to $40,000 doing that. They got fucking ripped off, which is kind of terrible, especially because they made this album and then everybody was like, oh, that's a demo. That's not an album. That's just a demo.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So good on whatever that studio owner was for just milking them for all the money that they had. It's goddamn ridiculous.
Still cashing checks from that.
So that's where the anger's coming from.
Yeah.
All right. But speaking of cash and checks, 2.7 million, which is the copies of this album that were sold worldwide, which is goddamn ridiculous. Number one is the chart position for Slipknot on the US independent album charts, as well as the US Heat Seekers charts, which is crazy that this album could have a number 1 chart position on any chart whatsoever. It's not accessible. It's not for the masses. And somehow they struck a vein, and this sold to an extreme degree. And then the last number that we are going to do is just every goddamn day, which is how often former singer and percussionist Anders Kolsefny, who left the band shortly before this album was produced, must be kicking himself. Because goddamn, did he miss out on a payday.
And what was the sticking point? That he didn't want to wear a mask?
No, we'll get into it later, but the sticking point was that they got a different singer and they were like, why don't you just be a percussionist? And he was like, no, fuck that. Like, dude, that's the easiest job in the world, man.
He said he didn't want to wear a mask. That's how funny.
You'd be cashing checks, just sitting in the background, just going ting ding 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 ting ding
I got a baseball bat. I got a beer keg here.
That's pretty great.
I interviewed Tom Warman, the guy that found Kiss.
Okay.
And the producer, he did like Blue Oyster Cult and Ted Nugent, all these other bands. And I asked him, I said, what did the label say when you brought him Kiss? Did they tell you to go fuck yourself and never do that again? He goes, yes. He goes, yes. The president of the label, when I was in A&R, we saw Kiss. They had just put on makeup and they were called Wicked Lester before, and somebody left. And he goes, and they had this makeup on. They go, this is our new thing. It's Kiss. And so he said he showed it to his boss, and his boss was like, this is the worst I've ever seen. I'll never fucking do this again.
And then 3 years later, when he's buying his 3rd house with the Kiss checks, he's like, you know what, man? Maybe you had a point there. All right.
Mask, dude.
So thank you to everybody for listening to the show. Just quick plugs. You know, we got a Patreon page. We actually just have released, I believe, the final episode of our 90s song battle is available exclusively to our Patreon listeners. If you want to go there, check it out. We're going to continue to give you all this content every week for free, but we are doing some Patreon exclusive stuff. Go check it out. I somehow managed to get the notoriously unflappable Adam mad at me. It's really great. It gets super chippy and personal as we fight over the best song of the 90s. We got some t-shirts. If you want to give us a review, we would love a review as well. Thank you for listening to our pluggables. Now we're going to dive into the background of Slipknot. And spoiler alert, it's a little, to say that it is a little haphazard and hectic is underselling it a whole lot. All right. So again, Slipknot is a nonette. 9 guys in the band. It's Corey Taylor on vocals, Mick Thompson on guitars, Sean Clown Cran on percussion, Craig 133 Jones on samples, Josh Brainerd on guitars, who quit the band after the recording of this album and was replaced by Jim Root, who actually only appears on one track on this album.
Oh,
You
no.
got Chris Fenn on percussion, who is credited on the album, but the only sound that he actually gets on the album is him vomiting on a track.
It's gross.
Got Paul Gray on bass, Joey Jordison on drums, and Sid Wilson on turntables. There's actually one more guy, Greg Cuddles Welts, who apparently plays percussion on a couple of the tracks, but only made it on Spit It Out. He leaves the band before this album actually comes out. So
I mean, how do you get that many people in a band?
you just
I
decide you
want
don't
to
want to
know.
make any money.
Do you go
You're
to
like,
a
"I don't wanna make
mall
any
and just like
money."
walk?
You don't wanna
You
make
just
any
walk around and ask people in public, like, "Do you want to be in my band? Do you play
So-
any instruments?"
It's actually kind of interesting. We're going to start the story with Sean Clown Cran. All right. Slipknot is described as his brainchild. He's been responsible for a lot of the visual aspects of the band and their overall ethos of sort of anti-capitalist, anarchic, basically like a whole host of antisocial.
That's some shit he made up because they sell records.
Oh yeah, but he somehow got really pissed off about it and was like, "I hate this fucking business and making me all this money. I don't know if I can do this anymore." I mean, you mean to stand in the background and hit a drum every 5 minutes?
Wait. Time out. He really said anti-capitalist. They like showcased. It wasn't like this isn't the internet era where you get MySpace famous. Like you had to go find a record label to give a shit about you.
Oh yeah, no, and they purposefully hunted for a record label.
That is awesome.
Listen, it's easy to be anti-capitalist once you've made all of your money, and you're like, capitalism fucking sucks, man.
I don't even understand how that came out of his mouth.
All right. So Sean Cran, he's a native of Des Moines, Iowa. Right. And so he grew up in Iowa. In his 20s, he was a welder in Des Moines, living a very depressing life, getting up super early to go to work as a welder, working himself to the point of exhaustion to make ends meet. Apparently, he would routinely fall asleep at the wheel while driving home from work and had many brushes with death, with car accidents. And then coupled with a death in his family in his early 20s, he kind of had this realization that he wanted to do something more with his life. He was not satisfied with just being a blue collar worker in Iowa, and he wanted to create the biggest band on the planet. That was his stated goal. And so he picks the universally accessible and notoriously liked genre of thrash metal for this project.
So is he just like playing like a cowbell and starting?
No, he's a drummer.
He was the first drummer, I think. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So it's 1992, and he forms a band called Heads on the Wall, who played, and I quote, funk metal cover songs, which just sounds terrible. I want no part of that. But like, all right, whatever. We're gonna move past it because there's a lot of shit to get through here. One of the important things to note, and Marty, this kind of gets to your comment about how do you get 9 guys in your band, is that the Des Moines metal scene is actually pretty tight knit and very incestuous. Lots of swapping of members, and the band Slipknot, I guess it would be more accurate to say the several bands that ended up coalescing to form Slipknot are kind of gaining and shedding members, swapping members throughout this time. So it's a small scene, and all these guys kind of know each other. So in the early 90s, the biggest band is this band called Atomic Opera, which has Jim Root as their guitar player. And there's another thrash metal band performing at the time called Motifidius, who has as their drummer Joey Jordison. They're kind of decently successful in the local scene. They're not huge or anything like it. It's not a big scene. But after opening for Atomic Opera, their guitar player decides, fuck it, I'm going to leave and I'm going to join Atomic Opera. Jordison then says, hey, I need to find another guitar player, and he gets Craig Jones to join the band on guitar, because Craig Jones, regardless of the fact that he is a sampler, in Slipknot is actually a guitar player. More on that later. So Cran at the time, he knows a bassist named Paul Gray. Paul's also living in Des Moines. He's actually born and lived for part of his life in LA, and then his family relocated to Des Moines later. So he is very pissed off about that.
Yeah.
Understandably so.
Understandable, yeah.
Yeah. You go from Des Moines to from LA to Des Moines. That's not an upgrade, I gotta say. No offense to all of our 6 Iowa listeners out there, but I think anybody can agree that LA's probably got a little bit more going on than Des Moines. So Gray, he's very active in the Iowa metal scene, playing in such bands as Sudden Infant Death Syndrome and Anal Blast. He's playing guitar.
You're making up names.
I think both of those are real things, but okay.
That's right up there with Butt Problems, also from Soundwave Studios.
So Butt Problems is a very good name. Butt Problems is more accessible than Anal Blast. Anal Blast is off-putting. Butt Problems, you're like, I can relate to that. Yeah, I've had some of those before. All right, so Gray is playing in a band called Vex with 2 X's. And Josh Brainerd is on guitar, and a guy named Anders Kolsefny is on drums. Eventually, Anders Kolsefny takes over vocal duties in the band and kind of establishes himself as a singer. Based on their mutual connection, Cran and Gray get together in Gray's basement. They kind of play and record some music with Kolsefny on vocals and some other random unimportant dude who's playing guitar. It is during that time that they record a song called Slipknot, which, to hear the story, is actually the song Sick, the opening song on this album in its early form. But it has Anders Kolsefny on vocals. It's given a completely different approach. There's a different drummer. Everything is different about it. But that was the nugget of the song. So no band is officially formed in these sessions, but Gray forms this band called Inveigh Catharsis. Terrible band name. Kolsefny's back on drums. Josh Brainerd's on guitar. Motifidius, they're still going strong. So it's like 1994. And they're actually going so strong that Josh Brainerd leaves Inveigh Catharsis for Motifidius. But then they kind of break up soon thereafter. Gray forms another band called Body Pit, again with Anders Kolsefny and a guy on guitar named Donnie Steele. He actually tries to recruit Joey Jordanson on drums, but Jordanson declines, and they get Mick Thompson in the band. So Thompson, another Des Moines lifer. He's apparently
this is like a Kafka novel.
I know, it's fucking
the
ridiculous.
only person that can follow this is like our 4 Iowa listeners. You know, they're like, oh yeah,
I had to I was going cross-eyed trying to keep all these fucking names together. My notation of like who is what in this it's overly descriptive because I cannot follow any of this shit.
Can we start referring to them by their mask types? Is that
it's even more confusing.
Like Casey Jones, Quiet Riot guy. Which
that's way more confusing. Casey Jones, Quiet
Riot. All right, so we got Mick Thompson. He's a Des Moines lifer again, obsessed with metal. Big Beatles fan apparently too. You can really tell the melodic influence of the Beatles on this Slipknot album. In 94, he joins Body Pit. He's 21 years old. He's trying to make it in the music scene. He's basically giving guitar lessons to shitty little kids for money, and that's how he's making his real money. But he wants to join a successful band. So he's pretty stoked when he gets to join Body Pit because they're kind of a successful local band. But as soon as he joins, they break up, basically. So September 1995, Paul Gray, the bassist, again, he's out in the wind. He's put together several bands that were kind of big in the Des Moines metal scene, but nobody ever broke out of that small regional area. And Cran's plan to create the biggest band in the world is not going so hot. He's still playing funk metal covers in his band Heads on the Wall. So eventually he meets up with Gray. They kind of talk about, hey, remember we did those sessions a few years back? They were pretty good. They team up again with Anders Kolsefny, who had been the singer in their sessions back in the day, and they form a group called Pale Ones. They recruit Donnie Steele on guitar, and they're trying to round out their lineup. They have Gray, who plays bass, Steele, who plays guitar, Cran, who plays drums, Kolsefny, who plays drums and sings. And so they're like, who do we need? we need another drummer. That's what we need. So they go out and they recruit Joey Jordison because he's looking for a project. At the time, his band, Modacific, whatever the fuck their name is, terrible name, had broken up. And Paul Gray invites him to kind of come over and play with Pale Ones. And listen, I don't know how good Cran or Colsefni were at the drums, but I do know that immediately they were both pushed to percussion, and Joey Jordison took over on drums.
Listen, props to Clown, whatever his name is, for accepting that and instantaneously moving to percussion. That was the correct move.
Yeah. Again, it's the easiest job in the world. It's like if I was working at my current company and they're like, "Hey Tom, do you want to just like make the same amount of money you make now, but you just like answer our mail?" Can I do that, please? Yeah. It's basically that level of, it's a lateral move because the pay's the same, but at this point the pay is nothing. Let's be clear.
Exactly. You're like the drummer's nervous before the show. You're like, why are you so nervous?
Yeah. You got me backing you up, man. I have my little ding dings going on.
Right.
All right. So Colsefni's doing the lead vocals, Cran's doing the backup vocals. They get Josh Brainerd as a second guitar player, mostly because like he and Jordanson were kind of tight from their days in Modafidius. So we got 6 members now. And in any reasonable band, the story of adding members would be over. But oh no, the story is not even close to over. This is a goddamn mess. All right. So they're in Pale Ones, but that name doesn't last long. Within 2 months, they call themselves Meld. This is November of 1995. They're playing as Meld. Cran is still determined to be the biggest band in the world. He and Gray, they kind of spend countless nights hanging out at a local gas station where Jordanson was working the night shift to strategize about the future and direction of the band. Because apparently it takes a really long time to say, let's all wear masks and invite a bunch of deadweight performers in the band so we have to split our money up 9 ways. Like, I can understand that. But one of the key takeaways from these late night hang sessions was the decision to change the band name to Slipknot. And I think that was a really good decision. Slipknot is a good name for this kind of a band. Certainly better than Meld.
Yeah,
and we talked a bit about the marketing aspect of it. Like, that's good marketing.
The other bands that had masks before them didn't hit. Mushroom Head, you don't walk around going Mushroom Head. Like, fuck it. I'm sure that person exists somewhere in Cleveland, but I've never met him.
Yeah. And if your band name is evocative of a dick, it's hit or miss on that one. Hit or miss. All right. So Slipknot is performing in the area. They pretty quickly decide we got to get into the studio. They have no record contract, no real prospect of a record contract, but they're super serious about it. So they book themselves some time at SR Audio in Des Moines and start recording an album. I'm sorry. I mean, start getting milked for all of their content. Because this is where they get $40,000.
It's going to be $1,000 an hour, young guys.
It's such an insane number. I cannot understand. So they left with the album recorded, produced, mixed, and 1,000 copies of it burned on CD.
How long did this take? Did you find that out?
For $40,000. It took like a month and a half or something. Like,
ooh, I was hoping you'd say a year.
No.
I'd feel a little better if you said a year.
So technically, it was December 95 to March 96, but they weren't in there like every day.
Oof.
They were
40 grand. I'm in there
for a while. 40 grand is a lot of, like, you could make a fucking Police album for less than 40 grand pretty easily. And that includes tickets to the Bahamas, like record on the beachfront. All right. But again, to add insult to injury, the album that they produced is basically super shitty in quality. And everyone was like, well, that's kind of a decent demo, but like that's not going to sell. So they're having some turmoil. And this was like my favorite part of the research is that during the recording process for Mate, Feed, Repeat, Kill, guitarist Donnie Steele is like, hey, wait a second. I'm a devout Christian. Are we like a angry satanic band or something like that? And I can only hypothesize that this is the first time he was able to understand the lyrics And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, that's what you're saying? I can't be in this band anymore. I have to quit. And so he quits basically for like moral reasons. He's like, I just couldn't take it. It was against my beliefs as a devout
What were they
Christian.
talking about at band practice? That's what I'm kind of confused about.
Right?
Right.
They're like, here,
Who
put
loves
on
Jesus?
this, put on this
Yeah.
bloody pig mask here. Yeah, no. We're a pretty down the middle band. Yeah,
Well,
everything's pretty great.
It's a good time to drop in that I happen to be researching Des Moines, Iowa, because I know so little about it, and I caught this little factoid that between 1942 and 2009, there was a city ordinance that made dancing illegal.
Footloose Town.
They grew up in Footloose.
Yeah.
The real thing.
Oh man. The only other explanation that I can think for Donnie Steele leaving the band is that he was like watching the bills rack up and he's like, at some point they're gonna make me pay this 40 grand. I just don't want to.
Yeah, he's got to steal from the collection basket.
This is such the antithesis of the Nirvana story where like they got the guy in because they needed to pay like the $800 for that first record. And that makes more sense for a band recording a record, in my opinion. And 95, I was doing music shit in 95, and I don't in like real studios. But how real was that studio? Because there's also like the reality factor. Like you try to walk in like fantasy studios in Berkeley in 1995. They were, first of all, they were booked.
Yeah, you're not getting into that.
You're not even getting in. And if you are getting in, it's one of those like, oh, an intern we're gonna get you in at 1 a.m. when fucking Grateful Dead leave. And
Right.
got 3 hours and you can't touch the cocaine bowl.
We looked at Electric Ladyland Studios in New York not that long ago. And we could have recorded like 3 albums for $40,000 at fucking Electric Ladyland Studios, not AR Studios in Des Moines, Iowa.
I mean, it's a function not only of how expensive the studio is, which they get expensive, of course, but they can be really cheap. Like even really good professional studios can maybe run for $600 or $800 a day with the guy working there as the engineer. They go up from there, but it's probably more a function of how slow they were at doing the thing, right?
But if you say it sounds bad, were they like, no, put those good microphones away. We got these ones from Radio Shack. They're the same thing, brother.
Yeah, and we're not even talking about this album, which actually sounds pretty good production wise. We're talking about like another album. We're not even.
We're talking about their first one. We're not even at their album. There's like 4 more members we got to add to this mix.
I get it. Yeah, to split the cost. And now, I get it.
I'm so baffled by that. Like the mixing process is going to take 18 hours a day. Like what was it?
And I'm sure the guy was saying it with a straight face and just like, yeah, so it'll be like $2,000 a day. Yeah, and they're like, oh.
You guys want reverb on this track? That's
going
to cost you.
The reverb upsell. All right. So, hey, listen, Donnie Steele leaves the band, and Craig Jones comes in to replace him on guitar. And then almost immediately moves over to samples because apparently they were just putting such complex samples on their songs that they couldn't reproduce live. And like, oh, we need a sampler. And he's like, you know what? I'll be the sampler. Again, just the easiest goddamn job in the
that
world.
Also costs money. This is 1995, 96. Samplers weren't cheap.
Yeah.
Relative to their availability and sample time. I mean, what was
probably seemed like a bargain compared to a $40,000 studio bill, though. You're like,
also, I'm gonna guess that the sample guy is the guy with the spikes coming out of his head.
He is the guy with the spikes coming out of his head. There we go. All right, so they're like, "Oh shit, we just lost our second guitar player again because he's now a sampler. He didn't leave the band or anything. He's still collecting a check, but he has moved over. And so we need to replace him again. So in steps Mick Thompson, who remember had played in Body Pit with Paul Gray. So let's level set again here. It's 1997. We got Cran on percussion, Gray on bass, Jordison on drums, Craig Jones on samples, Mick Thompson on guitar, Josh Brainert on guitar, and Kolsefny on vocals and percussions. They have spent a ridiculous amount of money to record their first album, Mate, Feed, Repeat, Kill. They have 1,000 CDs printed, no distribution deal. They're selling them themselves They eventually get a deal with Ismist Records for distribution, but they're like getting no play, no label interest. And they do have the whole look going on though. They're playing live shows. They got the whole act where they're dressed up in fucking pig masks and shit and wearing matching like suits with numbers and stuff. That's all kind of baked in at this point. But they're like, we need to get a record contract. They're getting no label interest. So this is where we enter Corey Taylor, who is the vocalist on the album, and I think is a very important member of the band. So Taylor, born in 73 in Des Moines, spent his early years in nearby Waterloo, which is as depressing as it sounds, I'm sure. He was raised by a single mom who, like most single moms, especially in the 70s, didn't have a lot of economic prospects. So he ended up moving around a lot so his mom could find work. He says that by the time he turned 15, he had already lived in 25 states, which is got to be just like crazy isolating. You're never developing real relationships, or even if you do, maybe it's worse because you have to leave them in like 6 months.
Sounds like his mama was on the run. I mean, who needs jobs that quick?
Yeah, that's a lot of states. That's true.
Yeah, either he's full of shit or his mama's on the run.
Well, to give you an idea of
mama.
what his child life was like, he had already overdosed twice by the time he was 15 years old.
Oh yeah, she was on the run. She was dropping off.
His mom is not a very attentive mother, shall we say. He also was sexually abused when he was 10 years old and like kind of didn't tell his mom about it, but his mom also didn't notice that this life-altering event had happened. It sounds pretty fucking terrible, all in all.
Can I just jump in with a positive comment, which is listening to interviews of these guys, Corey Taylor did seem pretty down to earth and chill. I kind of like
he's still alive.
Yeah.
I mean, not just that, but he just seemed very sane and kind of humble, even in interviews from around this time.
Did you see recently he quit?
Oh,
really?
He's taking a break from everything. He was on tour for a solo thing. He's keeping his Asia dates, and he canceled all these other dates that he was supposed to do for a solo project because he's officially burnt out.
I mean, honestly, he's probably very loaded at this point because Slipknot sold a goddamn lot of albums.
A lot of records.
And so, at some point you might as well just sit back and enjoy
but
it.
I mean, I get tired just listening to him sing. So.
But add the caveat: they sold records when people were buying records.
Oh yeah,
and that's
huge. Yeah,
yeah. In the CD era,
in the CD era, they sold records. Those are the people that have what we like to call in poor circles "fuck you" money.
Oh yes. All right, so his childhood is total shit. The one saving grace of his childhood is his grandmother, who is kind of like the only stable person that he knows, and she ends up introducing him to rock music kind of early in life. He becomes a big fan of Elvis. He likes Black Sabbath. And at the age of 15, after again overdosing twice, he basically says, fuck this, I'm moving in with my grandmother. His grandmother takes custody of him, and she ends up becoming a big booster of his musical aspirations and is like helping him buy equipment, driving him to gigs, really encouraging him. And he has credited his grandmother with basically saving his life and pointing him in a direction that he could pursue something that was positive. And so, 18, he moves out. He's trying to make it as a singer. He's doing some various odd jobs, but he's in a band called Stone Sour from like 92 to 97. And they're playing around Des Moines. He's kind of treading in the same waters as Slipknot. And he's actually at the first show that Slipknot plays as Slipknot. And he's apparently blown away by the band. And his statement was, this band is fantastic. Their singer sucks. I'm going to be the singer in that band.
Wow.
And dude, if you will it, it is no dream, he makes it happen. Because
send it.
Yeah. In 1998, Slipknot decides, listen, we've had this first album that we spent a ton of money on. Didn't really work. We need to go back in the studio. And I'm sure the studio guys were calling him every day, like, hey, you want to come record another album, guys?
Yeah. No, like I bought a new Mercedes.
Yeah.
One for my wife.
Now we do charge per band member. I should warn you.
But they are like, Jason, to call back to what you had said earlier, they're like, we need to create a demo specifically for record labels to notice us. We're going to go back in and create a product that we can shop around to record labels. And they decide that they want to have a more melodic feel to their songs. And listen, I know you hear this album and you're like, a more melodic feel. If you listen to their first album, it is actually more melodic. This is more melodic. It says a lot about what that first album, Mate, Feed, Repeat, Kill, sounded like. But
you keep saying it's got to be repeat at the end, right? Or they're not that grammatically.
I'm sorry, Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat. What the fuck ever. There's too many things for me to try to keep in the old duder's head here. This one's a little confusing for me. So anyway, they bring in Corey Taylor. They go back in the studio. They record a 5-song EP, and Kolsefny is not happy being relegated to percussion. He's like, this is fucking bullshit. And he quits the band.
This is where band members go to die. That's just
Percussionists don't get puss, dude.
It's fun. It's funny. Yeah, they're basically a bunch of pussies. They just like let everyone still remain in the band.
Yeah,
like, you're,
right?
you're not the singer anymore, but you can play percussion. There's already 4 percussion players. Like, do you want to be in the band or not?
Yeah. Okay, but Kolsefny says, no, I'm taking a stand. I will not be in the band. And you would think that they already have a drummer and a percussionist, and so they're good. But no, they recruit another percussionist, a guy called Greg Cuddles Welts, to join the band as the second percussionist. Apparently, this is a very necessary part of their show. I don't know what the fuck they were thinking.
I do feel like rhythm and percussion is an important part of their aesthetic, and watching live videos of them, it does look cool to have 2 extra guys banging on big tom-toms in the front. They don't do it the whole show, but they do it occasionally.
But their drummers playing like a million notes per second.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. It makes the least sense with this particular drummer because he plays so fast and so many notes. It really feels even less necessary than normal.
And he's so precise. Can we add how precise Joey Jordison was?
Yeah.
Totally. And creative, too. I really think he's a great drummer, not just a fast drummer.
Agreed.
Sorry, that it is a loss. It is a loss to the music world. Yeah. I will say that. As shitty as we're going to be on this band, like we have to admit, like rest in peace, that dude. Fuck. And now I'm all sad because the strength of this kind of music is in the groove, is in the rhythm section, which kind of becomes the guitars and the bass link up, and one of the things that I think no one really talks about with nu metal is it's really not just the end of mid-range guitar tone and no solos, but it's also the beginning of very complicated drum parts, because you have a bunch of kids that grew up watching MTV, so they grew up listening to hip hop as well. So there's like an interesting hip hop feel, and it's also the time where heavy music stops being so white, and you start to have different ethnicities, literally different cultures, truly adding to the heavy genre. Probably you could say starting with like Roots, and you have bands like El Nino. However you feel about that music is however you feel about it, but we can't kind of undersell the fact that it really was something different. I may not have liked 90% of it, but
yeah.
90% seems low, by the way. I'm going to go for like 98% of it.
Yeah. I was gonna say one of these songs actually remind me of a Fishbone song, which is kind of probably earlier 90s.
I mean, that's another band with like 15 members. Like we joke, but ska bands, like the real No Doubt is like 9 people. It's not those 4 or 5 that you see on stage. It's like 9. There's a horn section, and Fishbone had a horn section and all that ska stuff.
Yeah, the horn section is a thing that requires multiple people. Percussion section is not a thing.
Yeah. Unless you're in like some crazy Latin jazz fusion band or something like that.
Coming at you live.
All right. So we're going to get back to this story. So Slipknot, I'm doing spoiler alert here. They don't have enough members. And they're like, we really need one more guy to tie this whole lineup together. They end up getting a DJ named Sid Wilson involved as well. And I don't understand why. They have a sampler already. They got a DJ, but they're like a charity project, I think, for people in Des Moines to lift themselves up out of their economic situation. So, good on them for that. The demo that they recorded actually works to attract studio attention. And in June 1998, they sign a 7-album deal with Roadrunner Records and get a $500,000 advance.
Wow.
Probably only 200,000 of which they had to pay back to that studio.
Yeah.
All right, so they got a record contract. They got a $500,000 advance. They've made it. They get to travel to sunny Malibu, California in September 1998, which you're coming from Des Moines, Iowa in September, and you go and spend 2 months recording their self-titled album, Slipknot. Now, apparently the recording process was super crazy and chaotic, and Ross Robinson signs on to produce them. He actually was the guy who signed them originally and then kind of signed their contract over to Roadrunner with the expectation that he was going to produce it as well. But he is very much feeding into the chaos of this recording session. He's fucking with the band members while they're recording and, starting fights and throwing shit. They recorded the drums in 3 days, which is actually kind of incredible. It gives it this nice, really raw and kind of live feel. But you've fought through all of this bullshit of the Iowa scene, sinking a ton of money into the project, not making any of it back. You finally get a record contract. And what does fucking Josh Brainerd do? He quits the band. Despite recording guitars on all tracks except for one, he quits because of creative differences. And Jim Root, who we had talked about earlier in the story, just gets to step into the perfect situation. And
so who's writing all the music? Are they doing it collaboratively? Is 9 people?
It's a little bit of a collaborative process in terms of if you look at what the official credits are, all songs are written and composed by Sean Cran, Chris Fenn, Paul Gray, Craig Jones, Joey Jordison, Corey Taylor, Mick Johnson, Sid Wilson. It's the fucking whole band, basically.
How could that not be chaotic in a studio setting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds stupid and terrible. Jeez. But it's a surprise hit. Surprise to everybody. The recording, the record label, to the band themselves, they somehow get this dedicated fan base that's kind of drawn to this disaffected, confused, pissed off sound that they have. And it goes double platinum in the US.
Damn.
Which is fucking crazy. And how is it received? It's received incredibly well for a not very accessible album. And I'm going to read not the entirety, but a chunk of the Rick Anderson All Music review here, which is, you thought Limp Bizkit was hard? They're the Osmonds. These guys are something else entirely, and it's pretty impressive. Although those lyrics that are discernible are not generally quotable on a family website, suffice it to say that the members of Slipknot are not impressed with their fathers, their hometown, or most anything else. And yeah, it does kind of, Jason, to your point, come off as a bunch of guys who are just fucking goddamn, everything sucks. Man, my life is boring.